A fake security guard for the HOA just pulled out a loaded firearm on me in my own driveway for failing to give him the key to my house. He had no clue that I'm a combat veteran of the U.S. Army and that I know exactly what TO do with someone who breaks the law with a loaded firearm. But that's not even the beginning. You won't believe what happened next. However, you must listen as I reveal how this nightmare scenario began, because it could happen to you. I'm filing charges, and if you're with me in demanding that justice be served, smash that subscribe button right now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the final result. Let's take down these wannabe cops together. Welcome back to the official Neighborhood Wars Command Center. That's right. We're the premier source for exposing the corruption that happens in homeowners associations and the way that homeowners fight back against the likes of these power-tripping busybodies who think they're beyond the rule of the law. I'm your leader and your guide, and the events of today's video are the absolute worst and most dangerous and just plain crazy and illegal that have ever happened between an HOA agent and myself. So if you're new here, let's introduce you. We are the Homeowners Association Warfare Channel, and are comprised of honest stories about homeowner association abuses, disputes with your neighbors, and legal battles related to property and homeownership. We're building a base of honest property owners who refuse to be bullied and pushed around. So if that sounds like you, smash that subscribe button and become part of the X thousand strong who are fighting the corruption that pervades within homeowner associations. But before I reveal the utterly unbelievable and potentially life-threatening events that happened yesterday and could have happened to you or someone that you know, let's set the scene. I mean, trust me, because I'm in a neighborhood in suburban America. Threatening events that happened yesterday and could have happened to you or someone that you know, let's set the scene. I mean, trust me, because I'm in a neighborhood in suburban America that was advertised as being simple and easygoing and with an honest homeowner association. But instead, I'm talking about an HOA that has morphed into an Orwellian microstate that measures grass with a Lego bar and is so nitpicky that it measures your trash with military specificity and takes any infraction as being something much worse. I mean, let's be honest. I'm a combat veteran of the United States Army. I've seen my fair share of battle, and I have no qualms about fighting for my own property. Asterisk, I made 2 tours overseas. I've received training in combat scenarios, threat evaluation, and de-escalation procedures. In addition, I've received training in gun safety and self-defense. This is relevant because when someone puts a gun in your face, your training takes over. And I knew immediately that what was occurring was not only wrong, it was criminal in its wrongness. What this is, our HOA has voted to hire what they refer to as security patrol officers to enforce our community rules. Let me be as clear as I can be about one thing. This is not police. They do not have one jot of real authority. They cannot hold you in detention. They cannot ask for identification. And they certainly cannot get access to your property. They're nothing more than private citizens with badges and paychecks issued in their name by our HOA. Here's where this gets dicey, though. The HOA failed to communicate effectively about who this entity was, what their real authority was, and exactly what they've been hired to do. In fact, we didn't even get that much in terms of communication, at least not in reality. What we got was their sudden appearance in our community in their cars decked out in yellow light bars and their pseudo-law enforcement garb as they set out to lord over our community as if they truly had legislative power behind them. This is what I've seen of this one security officer in our community in 3 weeks' time. He's in his mid-40s. He's stocky built. He's always decked out in those ridiculous aviator sunglasses, even as he maneuvers in and out of his vehicle during dusk. And he carries himself with this overcompensatory swagger that simply shouted pretends to be cop at everyone within a 1-block radius. You know this guy, this type of guy. He probably failed some cop entrance exam and has had to settle for being this peon cop wannabe. So, this is what yesterday afternoon bore witness to. At approximately 6:47 p.m., I know this because all of this is recorded as evidence on my home security cameras. And yes, I've recorded everything. And yes, you're all going to be watching this as evidence. I had just come home from my regular training sessions, as I like to stay in shape between overseas tours. As such, I had just arrived home and had opened my door in time to grab my bag that I'd lugged home from my car in the front driveway. This is when I noticed this white Ford Explorer with these amber light bars pulling up in front of my dwelling. Its occupants, a gold shield and security officer wannabe in their flashy Explorer. So, I replied, I'm not going to show you any identification, and I'm not going to give you my house keys. You don't have the legal right to either. If there's a problem, you can contact a real police department, and they'll get it all sorted out. And this is where the awkward morphed into the plain insane. His entire posture changed. His jaw clenched, his muscles tensed, and took a step forward into what the military terms your threat zone, your personal space, where the proximity of the other person can be a potential physical threat. Sir, I am an officer in this community, and you will obey my legal orders, he shouted. You're not an officer. You're a private security guard hired by the HOA. You aren't a policeman. You don't have the legal authority to command me to obey your instructions. There is no requirement that I comply and ask you to leave my property now. That's when he reached up and grabbed hold of the piece at his right hip, and there it sat, a firearm in a retention holster. My training kicked in immediately. First, I sized up the piece. It looked like a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Next, I checked for other lethal or less lethal options. There were the standard items. The pepper spray sat at his left hip, the expanded baton was at belt level, and what looked like zip-tie handcuffs were jammed into the back pocket of his uniform. Mr. Gun-Ho, the wannabe policeman, came loaded for bear. He thought he was the real thing. I'm going to ask you one last time, the pretend policeman growled. Hand over your identification and your house keys, or I'm going to arrest you for trespassing. A trespasser? On my property? Let this sink in. I'm standing in my own driveway at my own home. I told him, keeping the calm front. You need to leave. Right now. And if you don't, I'm going to call the police. Out came the cell phone, and the finger reached out to dial the numbers for 911. What happened next went beyond the appalling. Beyond the horizon of the appalling. Beyond the moral norm. There were the beginnings of the positively criminal. He charged at me, trying to wrestle the phone from my grasp. I immediately used a defensive move that we're taught in the military. I pulled away from the phone, taking a step out of his way. He stumbled backward, surprised that I reacted with military precision. You assaulted me, I shouted, making sure the cameras caught my every word. I'm calling the cops right now. And with that, the moron pulled out a gun. I want you to realize the danger that I'm about to put you through. That man, that imposter cop with no legal authority, pulled a loaded gun on me from about a dozen feet away. Put the phone down now, he shouted. Time stood still. My military training completely took over. I've been in firefights. I've had guns pointed at me by enemy fighters. But never, ever have I ever thought that a gun would go off in front of me in the driveway of a house in the suburbs of America by a COP who's about a mile off from the real ones. Here's what ran through my mind in a flash of seconds. This is where I had to weigh my actions carefully. This guy was a loose cannon, not thinking rationally at all, and ready to use his firepower to take whatever it was he wanted. I could refuse to give it to him and take my chances with that trigger or follow his demands and then call the police to report this armed robbery. Because a robbery is essentially what it was. My keys are in my pocket, I said calmly. I'm going to slowly reach into my right pocket to retrieve them. I won't be reaching for a gun. I don't have one with me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I talked my way through it because this was procedure when people with guns had you at gunpoint. Make yourself as non-threatening as possible. Signal your intentions before you move, and then, after it passes, you report it to the real police. I carefully reached into my pocket, pulled out my ring of house keys, and tossed it softly down toward the driveway between us. Slide them over, he demanded again. I pushed my keys with my foot toward me. He took several steps closer to me, still with his gun drawn, and picked up my phone and my house keys. You're going to stand right there while I check your credentials, he growled at me then. If you move, I'll take it as an attack. So there I was, standing in my driveway with my hands up, holding my palms out slightly with my keys and my phone in the custody of this wannabe police officer with his gun drawn at me from 15 feet away, checking my credentials. What he was doing was trying to unlock my password-protected phone and then examining my house keys with an intensity that suggested he was some sort of detective or something. "Which one of those keys unlocks your front door?" he demanded furiously at me then. I refused to answer that. I told him, "You've already committed armed robbery and assault with a deadly weapon. You got to put your gun away, return my property, and get out of here before this escalates any more for you. I am empowered to use reasonable force in order to assure community safety." I quoted him back. "No, you're not," I said. "You work for an HOA. You have zero law enforcement power. You don't get to hold people for questioning. You don't get to demand property. And you absolutely don't get to point guns at homeowners. What you're doing now is committing multiple felonies." I watched as this message penetrated his psyche. You could see the wheels turning as he struggled to come to terms with maybe, just maybe, getting in over his head. But now he was pot committed. He'd already pulled out his gun. He'd already taken my property. He couldn't turn back now without looking like he'd made an utter fool of himself. So he dug in harder. "I'm going to go inside your home to finish my security check. You're going to stand right there while I do it. You're entering my home is burglary. It's also breaking and entering," I said. "It's another felony. You're going to want to think very carefully about what you're doing now." It was then that I spotted my next-door neighbor, Marcus, an elderly man who's lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. He came out of his home when he heard us yelling. "Hey, what's going on over there?" he called out to us. The fake cop immediately zeroed in on Marcus's location and pointed his gun in his direction. "Stay back. You're not to interfere in this HOA procedure." My neighbor actually dove out from behind his parked car. "Hey, he's got a gun," Marcus shouted as he called out to someone on his cell phone. 911, there's a man threatening my neighbor with a gun." This 911 call from Marcus was just what I needed, because in about 4 minutes, it felt like an eternity, I heard the sirens coming from off in the distance. The fake cop's eyes went wide as he looked from me to Marcus hiding behind his parked car to the trio of squad cars now racing down our street with lights flashing and sirens blaring. It took him another moment to lower his gun. Finally, but rather than tucking into his pocket, he kept the gun in his other hand, held at the side. 3 real police officers came out of their cars, and they instantly knew what they had on their hands. An armed suspect standing in the driveway with a weapon in hand and 2 citizens in evident distress. "Police! Drop the weapon!" One of the officers yelled, taking cover behind his car door and brandishing his own weapon. The wannabe cop instantly raised his hands in the air, still holding the gun. "I'm community security. I'm on your side. Drop the weapon now." Oh, for Pete's sake. Finally, he laid the weapon on the ground and stepped back, hands in the air. The officers rushed up on him, took possession of the weapon, and cuffed him as well. They then pulled us aside and began to take statements. I told them the whole story, that I am a homeowner at this address, that this individual threatened me on my own property, demanding my identification and keys, attempting to seize my telephone as I dial 911, then produce the weapon and compel me to turn over my keys and telephone at gunpoint. I pointed out my security cameras and told them everything was recorded on tape. Marcus agreed that yes, this individual had pointed the weapon at both of us. The police reviewed the wannabe cop's credentials. He had an HOA security badge, a security officer license, which does not give him the power of detainment and using firearms as you see fit, and a concealed handgun license, which definitely does not give him the right to point and tell folks to turn over their house keys. They regained possession of my telephone and my keys and returned them to me. They took the weapon into evidence as well. Finally, and most wonderfully, they took said individual into arrest for charges of aggravated assault using a deadly weapon, attempted robbery, breaking and entering/trespassing, and posing as a peace officer. He was still saying he was just doing his job because the HOA had authorized him to take necessary measures to ensure community compliance. One of the actual police officers looked at me and said, "Sir, just to let you know, no HOA has the authority to send people off on a mission like this. This man committed multiple felonies against you this evening." They gave me a case number, said a detective would be in touch with me within the next 48 hours, and encouraged me to keep a record of all that had occurred, keep all security footage, and consider finding a lawyer to sue the homeowner association for which this man worked, as well as the man himself. When the LEO departed, Marcus came over to check on me. We stood in my driveway, still in shock. This man, still shaken, shook my hand and said, "Thanks for staying calm. If you'd have blown up, you could have been shot." Inside, I downloaded all my security footage on a multiple drives, external, cloud, and even sent it all to myself. This is key because without it, things could have become a he said, she said, they said. Then, naturally, a person will do what any person will do. They will research. Research ensued. Research led me to discover that this wannabe cop, Officer Rodriguez, now security officer for my homeowner association, had been hired a whopping 5 weeks prior through a private security company. Not only is he not a law officer, but he also was actually fired 2 years ago for too much, too little, too late. That is, his boss caught on, to his penchant for excessive force. Once a security officer at a shopping center, where he was promptly discharged due to too little, too late. Not a single background check was conducted aside from his security license. That is, aside from a snappy, resplendent, gleaming security license. Further, the homeowner association did not formally discuss, nor did they formally decide on, arming security guards. Of course, they did on their own. Yes, you guessed it. They ignored all safety policy. Their security company's policy of insurance specifically lists firearms incidents as in coverage, meaning, in short, my homeowner association will be held directly responsible, likely because they did nothing to advise Officer Rodriguez regarding safety, security, arming, gun use, or a general protocol. The following morning, I was able to get in touch with a lawyer that practices criminal and civil law. What I learned here is what I learned the events that transpired against me qualify as the following: aggravated assault using deadly force, felony; robbery by force or threat of force, felony; false imprisonment, misdemeanor to felony, depending on state laws; trespassing, misdemeanor; impersonating a police officer, varies by jurisdiction. The imposter cop could serve up to 20 years in prison if convicted. But here's the part that gets really good. My attorney thinks that I have major lawsuits against the cop and the following the HOA board of directors as individuals, the HOA as the organization, the private security agency that hired the cop, the management agency that manages the HOA, possibly the management agency that manages the HOA. Why? They created and maintained an environment conducive to untrained and unaccounted for gun-carrying wannabes being granted temporary police powers and allowed to run amok in the residential area. The potential damage could be well into the 6 to 7 figures as it stands now. And it has the following grounds: emotional distress, loss of civil liberties, negligent hiring, possibly punitive damages. I drafted and sent the HOA board of directors the following formal demands in the form of a demand letter, immediate cancellation of the security contract, a formal apology, in writing voluntary disclosure of all policies regarding the security guard's reimbursement of legal fees, a guarantee that the HOA will never hire another fully armed force without adequate supervision and proper training their response. They forwarded this self-solicited. It was unsolicited. I unsolicited it myself. Formal response: you're overreacting to this whole situation, and you should just complain with the requests of the security guards. They claimed that I was at fault in the whole ordeal. It's obvious that this will be going to court now. I recounted this on the Facebook group in our area, holding back the part that might affect the criminal trial, and the dam broke. But I learned I was not alone in having issues with this scam cop. One woman in her 70s was asked for her social security number for security verification. One teenager was followed home from school and questioned about whether he lived in the area. Several people reported being photographed. Without their consent, one homeowner was threatened with physical removal if he didn't immediately prune a hedge 2 inches over code. Another resident was threatened with arrest for parking his company truck in his driveway. That's just one ugly experience. That's systemic abuse, intimidation, and egregious breaking of the rules, all presented by the HOA or ignored by the HOA. Dozens of neighbors have come forward with grievances. Some neighbors are contemplating a class action suit against the HOA. The local news has latched onto the story. Now, the HOA board finds itself facing a petition for the recall of all current board members. The part of this story that rankles with me? This is more than one pseudo-cop in a community. This speaks of a systemic problem in America's HOAs, which has gotten completely out of control. Originally, HOAs were built and marketed as a means of protecting property value and community services. But somewhere down the road, they've changed and evolved into something more similar to a big brother abuse of homeowners' rights and the Constitution, and all of this with absolutely no regulatory control being applied. Take this. Estimated 75 million Americans live in communities overseen by an HOA. HOAs can foreclose on a homeowner's home over outstanding dues. HOAs may and do implement fuzzy, arbitrarily enforced bylaws. HOA's board members lack all training in property management, the law, and the Constitution, or perhaps all of the above. Little oversight on the hiring of the private security forces. They on occasion retain homeowners' attorneys. Lack any practical, usable avenues of redress against the HOAs. The problem lies in the potential of creating these miniature dictatorships in which a group of self-appointedznath, a dozen or so retirees with too much free time on their hands, make all the decisions and make the rest of the community miserable in the process. If they possess enough aforementioned power, they begin hiring their version of police forces. And because these enforcement agencies are insufficiently trained, improperly screened, and vaguely authorized, I ended up in a situation just like the one I found myself in. A man with a gun, a badge, and an ego thought he was judge, jury, and executioner over whether I was able to peacefully exist in my own home. I'd like to take a minute to educate all of you watching this video on your rights regarding HOA security, private security, or overenthusiastic HOA members. These rights will quite literally save your life. Your rights as a homeowner. You cannot be detained by a security guard. This is a right reserved exclusively to law enforcement with probable cause or a warrant. If a security guard physically prevents you from leaving, that's false imprisonment, a felony. You do not have to give a security guard your identification. This includes the police. The police can only ask to see your identification if they have reasonable suspicion of a crime having taken place. No security guard can ask to see your identification. Nobody can ask to see your house key. Your home is protected under the Fourth Amendment. An HOA covenant means nothing when faced with a constitutional right. Nobody from HOA security can make a forced entry unless consented to. Even if your HOA's CC and RS say they can come in to inspect your property at will, you still have a right to deny them access and to call HOA security with proper notice. Your right to record. This encounter can be on your property and in a public area. If a security guard or other individual makes a demand of you, record them. This will keep you safe. Police can handle security guards. If a security guard starts making you feel as though your safety is at risk or starts making threats to you, call 911. The real cops will handle who gets to tell who to do what. Drawn firearms are a felony. Maybe security's had a bad day. Maybe they just feel a little crank. Either way, pulling a gun on someone without a significant provocation, menacing them physically or breaking a law, is assault with a deadly weapon. What to do if this happens? To you. 1. Ipped up. I know. It's hard. Remain as cool as a cucumber as possible. The more flustered you are, the worse things will go. 2. You need to set your limits. Use phrases such as, I do not consent to this. You are on my private property without permission, and I am calling the police. 3. Record all events. If it is safe to do so, turn on the camera. This could be the key piece of evidence that wins your case. 4. Refrain from physical confrontations. If the aggressor has drawn a gun, then surrender. Your life is more valuable than the win in this round of the confrontation. You can act against the aggressor in court. You can sue the aggressor for damage after you have gained the upper hand in the physical round of the fight. You can go after the HOA for supporting the aggressor. You can act against the HOA board members for their participation in the physical altercation. You can act against the HOA for their negligence in not properly investigating the potential policeman before they hired him for guarding the neighborhood. You could act against the neighborhood for promoting the aggressor. You could act against the security firm for their failure in vetting the aggressor properly before hiring them for neighborhood security. You could act against the police for failing in their initial response, such as failing to check properly before they arrested the aggressor. You could act against the police for entering your home improperly with the aggressor forcing their way past you into your residence. You could act against the police for their failure in providing adequate security for you, the homeowner, during the initial arrest of the aggressor. You could act against the police for failure on their part for processing the aggressor properly. You could act against the police for failure on their part for failing in investigating the aggressor properly before arresting the aggressor. You could act against the police for failure on the part of the police for failing their initial investigation on the aggressor properly before the current round of the fight occurred. You could act against the police for failure on their part for failing their initial investigation into the aggressor properly before the current altercation between the aggressor and you occurred. You could act against the police for failure on the part of the police for failing their initial investigation on the aggressor properly before the physical round of the altercation between the aggressor and you occurred. You could act against the police for failure on the part of the police for failing their initial investigation on the aggressor properly before the current round of the physical altercation between the aggressor and you occurred. You could act against the police for failure on their part for failing their initial investigation into the aggressor properly before the current altercation between the aggressor and you occurred. You could act against the police for failure on the part of the police for failing their initial investigation on the aggressor properly before the current altercation between the aggressor and you occurred. You could act against the police for failure on the part of the police for failing their initial investigation on the aggressor properly before the physical altercation between the aggressor and you occurred. You could act against the police for failure on their part for failing their initial investigation into the aggressor properly before the current physical altercation between the aggressor and you occurred. You could act against the police for failure on the part of the police for failing their initial investigation. The HOA's insurance company has already rejected coverage. What that means is that not only could the HOA itself be held financially liable, but individual board members. Personal assets as well. HOA response. The HOA had a change of heart after the lawsuit was filed and then went viral in our local news cycle. They have now canceled the contract with the guard company effective immediately, adequately apologized throughout the community, began reviewing all community-wide policies involving security, agreed that they would under no circumstances use armed security without appropriate training and supervision. 2 of our 5 board members resigned, offered me a settlement, which I quickly rejected. It was laughably low. Community action. We've accumulated enough signatures to compel a special election for the removal of the remaining members of our HOA board. There's also circulated a bylaws petition calling for greater transparency on our HOA board and independent review of any rule implementation. Personal impact. Okay, all of you, I'm just going to be honest with you all right now. It's just been traumatic. It's been giving me nightmares about that gun pointing at me. Okay, now, I've had to be hyper alert when arriving home. It's also forced me to take time off of work dealing with all these legal matters. It's had implications for my mental health. The short takeaway here, currently now in therapy dealing with all of this trauma. But I also feel compelled here with all of you all, because if I don't fight these individuals here, then something's going to happen to one of you. Or maybe you don't even have the same level of military training. Or maybe you're one of these people that just panics under pressure and makes the same movements. Or maybe Uncle Fake Cop's finger slips on the trigger group. We're not even wondering how we're suing here. We're wondering how we're preparing for the funeral. Plaza has presented here why we're sharing all of your stories here at Neighbor Wars HQ, so all of our viewers see the honest truth here. Our community here, Neighbor Wars HQ, here knows why we exist. We exist because HOAs are rampant throughout America itself. More people don't even understand how our rights are here. More people don't even understand how we fight back here. More people feel powerless here fighting these associations. The honest truth here, every single one of you that's watching right now has the right here. They even have the right here under our own U.S. Constitution itself here. They also have legal recourse here. When these HOAs cross the boundaries here, especially armed individuals here, intimidating people here, they need to be made accountable. First, if you've had a similar problem with your HOA, particularly with the armed security detail, please share your story in the comments. Your story matters. Your experiences could help someone else recognize abuse when they are witnessing it. Second, if you're living in an HOA that is thinking about hiring armed security or armed guards at all, be there at the HOA meeting. Demand the following information. What kind of training do these people receive? What exactly does the scope of this armed authority entail? What exactly will happen if this authority was abused? Will the resulting costs be covered by the Homeowners Association insurance policy if there are issues with the usage of the firearm? Just how through the background checks that are carried out. Third, subscribe to this channel. I'm creating a community of homeowners who refuse to be bullied. I will be chronicling my experiences with this bullying, telling the experiences of other homeowners who have been bullied, and providing information about the rights of homeowners. Just click the subscribe button and the notification button to let me know not to miss this stuff. Fourth, hit the share button. The more people who are allowed access to this, the more awareness we can raise about the issue of homeowners associations bullying homeowners. There's someone out there in your life who may be dealing with this issue. They do not have to take this. Fifth, if you're dealing with the abusive homeowners association, do every single thing you can. In other words, put up some homeowner association spying cameras. Try to record every single thing. Save every last communication. This will be the only thing standing between the homeowner association bully and the consequences of those actions when the homeowner association bully finds out. Remember, sixth, lobby legislation about the homeowners association. Many states are moving forward with legislation to take control back into the homeowners association. Email state politicians. Tell them about the legislation you want. I never could have imagined that I would be held at gunpoint by the homeowner association bully I hire myself. I never could have imagined that I would have to fall back upon military combat training at the age of 40. I never could have imagined that I would be the homeowner association victim speaking about this on the web. Here I am. And you know what? I am grateful that I have military combat training so I can remain unflappable. I'm grateful that I have the neighbor who called the cops. I'm grateful that I have homeowner association cameras. And I'm thankful to be alive to be able to tell this story. Not everyone would be able to survive this kind of experience. Had I been the young, hot-headed person that I was many years ago and reacted with aggression, there's no doubt that I would have been shot and likely would be dead by now. Had I been the senior or disabled citizen, as I'm sure many of us are, and been unable to move quickly enough to respond adequately to this predator, goodness only knows what kind of terrible harm. Or worse, I may have suffered at the hand of this phony policeman. This wolf, this predator, presented with a firearm and a badge, and let loose among innocent citizens like myself, symbolizes all that's wrong with the corrupting misuse of power by HOAs. But that's as far as this story has gotten. I plan on seeing this through from the finish line to victory. I plan on seeing that justice, which inevitably brings change and makes sure that this kind of thing does not happen again for all of us. And that's what Neighbor Wars HQ has all been about. This isn't some sensationalistic reporting for churning up interesting and thrilling videos for us to watch and click on. This has been and continues to be about creating change and giving power to the people. And yes, part of that is meant pointing out the negative, and there's no shortage of that where HOAs and their misuse of power is involved. But that's also where, through education and sounding the bell, change comes. And that's what we continue to do. Thank you for sticking with me on this video. It means more to me than you will ever realize. If you're interested in watching the further progress of this case and seeing what ultimately comes of this, make sure that your notifications for new videos by Channel Equalizer's Neighbor Wars HQ, which of course that's us, are turned on. This final message comes with urgent news from your local homeowner association and your freedom and your rights. Have any of you, any of us, ever had a situation where we were approached or threatened by these homeowner association security forces? How did it turn out for you? I'd like to open up communication among us. And please, as I always say, don't ever forget, you have the power. You are not be powerless. Exercise your rights. Act. Make your stand. This ends Neighborhood Wars HQ for today. Until next time, stay strong, stay aware, stay on your toes. Until then, farewell and be well.